In 1998, Konami released a game from a long-standing franchise that had a large impact in the cinematic direction of video games, Metal Gear Solid. From that point on, the sometimes convoluted exploits of the series' protagonist, Solid Snake, would continue to push the boundaries of the console technology of the time in terms of art and storytelling within the medium. But just how much does Snake change from entry to entry? That's what we're here to delve into, so sit back and relax because this is Low Poly. And so it begins, Solid Snake's infiltration of Shadow Moses Island, and the first time we're introduced to a fully 3D Snake. This Snake model is made up of 644 tries and features very basic geometry to define the anatomy and silhouette of the character. The very low-resolution pixel art style textures do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the detail, but there's something very charming about how that looks. Now, what looks to be like an absence of any real facial details to me seems to be an artistic choice that leans into the limitations of the hardware of the time, and instead creates a heavily stylistic art direction that stands out from most other games of the era. Interestingly, the body is one full mesh, with Snake's arms being detached at the shoulders to enable a higher range of movement without breaking the anatomy too much with more complex animations. The same goes for the head, which is separate from the neck, and also Snake's ears are not connected to his head either, instead being stuck on the sides, most likely to avoid cluttering up the topology trying to connect 5 vertices to the rest of the head. It's very hard to see in the game, making it a very economic way of tying it all together. The lower part of the body doesn't have all that much geometry at all, considering the range of movement afforded to Snake throughout the game, but that deep V-cut in the hips provides more than enough flexibility for any kneeling poses. At 644 tries, this is about average for 3D characters at the time, less than Mario's model in Super Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot's first model, but more than Tomb Raider's Lara Croft. This model was tasked with carrying a very narrative-driven game, and if you ask me, those cutscenes, for how limited they are, do the job and have a charm that I still love. But just 4 years later, Metal Gear was about to step up in a very cinematic way. Metal Gear Solid 2 marks the series really moving into Hollywood movie territory, and in that respect it needed a character model that could do more than just bob its head up and down to simulate speech. Meet Solid Snake 2.0, a much more robust version of the character which actually has a face. This model has 3,882 tries, and Snake's body from head to toe is one complete mesh. The hair cards on the top and back of the head to simulate hair, and the ammo clips, tactical pouch, and gun holster are placed on the body as if attached, but don't actually join to the rest of the model. The texture work this time around is stunning, honestly, and the amount of detail packed into these still very low-resolution textures really sell the believability of this sneaking suit. This design of Solid Snake is arguably the definitive one, and as you'll see, anytime that Snake appears in other game series, this design is always the one that's used. And I can see why. Yoji Shinkawa's designs yell really loudly in this one, and I particularly love the boots of this model. The texture work is so good, I can practically feel the material these would be made of if they were real. The mullet is a bold choice, clearly a reference to Snake Plissken from Escape from New York, which this version of Snake is heavily based on. Snake now has actual fingers, and this model overall has a range of motion needed to carry out those lengthy cutscenes in a believable way. I love this model. I love all the details that give it weight and make it feel a lot more solid, no pun intended. Metal Gear Solid 2 was ahead of its time and still stands up today in terms of its themes and some of the technology behind it, but Solid Snake would take a short break after MGS2. However, we'd soon discover there's more than one Snake. It's now 2004, and still with PlayStation 2, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, set in 1964, introduces us to Naked Snake. And for those of you in the room who don't know, it's all very complicated, so I'll keep it short, but this isn't Solid Snake. This model is 5,626 tries, that's 1,744 more than Solid Snake in MGS2. So same console, but now we're starting to push the hardware even further in terms of the character models. The level of detail in this model is also a step up. The amount of intricate texture work and modeling used to render out Snake's gear is really top-notch. Each kind of material in the outfit is meticulously crafted to add an extra layer of realism to the character. Surprisingly, the model is still very low poly in parts. The legs and the feet are pretty sparse in geometry in comparison to Snake's face, which would once again need more range and expression to carry a heavy story-driven game. There are a lot more polygons in the fingers too, lending more options for expression during cutscenes. When we directly compare MGS2 and 3's models side by side, it's clear to see that even though this is still using the PS2 hardware, we're definitely heading toward the next generation of consoles with regards to character rendering. But it would be another 4 years until we'd see Solid Snake return to action, this time on a much more powerful console. Before we get to that, Konami and Silicon Knights went ahead with a remake of Metal Gear Solid, something more in line with MGS2's style of graphics and gameplay. This would also mean remaking that original model into something that fits more with the series going forward. This version of Solid Snake is 4,139 tries, just 300 tries more than how Snake would appear in MGS2. Although Snake's face looks close to MGS2's face, they aren't actually the same model, or at least when we place one over the top of the other, they don't line up exactly. It's possible that MGS2's face was used as a base and tweaks were made, but there's no way of knowing that for sure. The resemblance is there though, which is the important thing. Snake is a character and he has to stay somewhat consistent. Everything about this model is a more fleshed out version of the low poly original. The textures help add more detail to the design, bringing it a lot closer to Yoji Shinkawa's original design concepts. But for me, it lacks the charm of those original models and isn't quite as cool as how Snake appears in the sequel. But time to fast forward now, it's 2008, Metal Gear Solid 4 releases on the more powerful PlayStation 3, and Solid Snake is now Old Snake. I won't go into the lore, don't ask, just take it for what it is. Old Snake's model is 14,646 tries, nearly 3 times more of a polygon budget than MGS3's Snake, and you can definitely tell we're in a whole new world of character modeling. Some staples still remain, like using hair cards to render Snake's beautiful grey mane, bandana still firmly placed on his forehead. Snake's face is a lot more detailed, depicting a much more wizened face with denser topology for more realistic expressions for those ever-lengthening cutscenes. This sneaking suit is probably one of my favorites and looks over the top in terms of detail. You'd imagine the amount of modeling work to render the muscle bulges and smaller details would be immense, but yet again, this is all texture work. Amazing normal maps filled with fine detail to bring out all the striking elements of this design, and great texture rendering to polish it off. In terms of materials, the vest is a highlight. It feels tangible with all the smaller pockets, clips, and straps. It's a real masterclass in modeling and texturing. Even now, 16 years later, it looks like something from the current generation. Metal Gear Solid 4 rounds out Solid Snake's saga, but he would appear in many other games too. Also in 2008, Solid Snake joined the roster in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. At 5,249 tries, this version of Solid Snake uses Naked Snake's head model from MGS3 with modified textures. If you view the wireframes side by side, you'll see they're pretty much identical. The body follows the design of the sneaking suit from MGS2, but it's all remade with much higher resolution texture work. Certain elements, such as the ammo clips and pouches, are separate from the body mesh, and the detail in the texturing is a huge step up from 6 years earlier, with creases and seams running throughout the sneaking suit. Just a really nice rendition of this version of Snake. But this wasn't Snake's only foray into Smash Bros. He also returned with this design in Ultimate. At 16,578 tries, this is a more stylized take on the character, but still maintaining the design from MGS2. Snake's model is all new, there's nothing borrowed this time. Still using hair cards to render out that mullet, Snake's hair has a nice sheen to it. Just because you're an elite soldier doesn't mean you don't have time to shampoo and condition. I love the extra detail in the texture of the main suit. They almost look like scales of snakeskin, which is a nice touch. Smash Ultimate's art style was very clean cut, but that doesn't mean there isn't some phenomenal artwork on display, as this model clearly shows. We go back in time now to 2006 and Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, a PSP game featuring Naked Snake once again. Understandably, with a much more limited system, we can expect that Snake's model here would be a lot less tries, and at 1,383, this model is a lot more basic than the ones we've seen. but still has over twice as many tries as Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid in 1998. This could almost be considered a lower level detail version of Naked Snake in MGS3, the face is obviously a lower resolution version of that design, and once again, the textures do a lot of the heavy lifting. Bear in mind, this would be seen on a much smaller screen with lower resolution. Picking out those details would be very difficult to scrutinize. Here in all its glory though, up close and personal, you can see where they had to adapt for a console with more limits. Again, I really like the design of this one. It's very distinct, and that splash of yellow on the arms and legs is very striking in quite a muted palette of greys and greens. Portable Ops also features Old Snake from MGS4, and this is basically the same design, but much smaller in scope at 1,330 tries. The textures are also much lower resolution compared to their PS3 counterpart, but it's all there, and on a small screen, it looks like what you'd see in MGS4, which interestingly hadn't been released yet, so this appearance of Old Snake actually comes before the most notable one. Not too much to say on this model, it's competent at representing the character, and it's cool to see how much of this design comes across in the higher res version we've already seen. I do like how the knife on the back is literally a 2D plane with the texture of a knife on it. You know, when it works, it works. Sticking with the PSP, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker released in 2010. This Naked Snake model is 1,777 tries and is about 300 more than the model in Portable Ops, and is rocking a similar look to MGS3's design. Again, a lot of very basic geometry in these models, just enough to get the job done. The texture work isn't bad at all, featuring a lot of the details we've come to expect from this series. Obviously, we're looking at the model much clearer than would be possible on the hardware, but it holds up very well. In 2014, Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes released on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. This is Naked Snake, or Big Boss, and at 18,904 tries is one of the larger models in the whole series. This version of Snake is a lot more realistic than the other versions we've seen before or since. Gone is the stylized design in favor of something more akin to an actual human being. The majority of the tries are in the face and the head naturally. This character needs to be able to emote properly as a human would without entering the uncanny valley and creeping us all out. We know what people look like, and if something is off, it's very noticeable. The body conversely has a lot of detail, but perhaps not on the scale you'd expect. The amount of tries here is around 8,000, so larger than any other version's full models, but that means there's nearly 10,000 tries in the head and hair alone. Texture work is yet again of fantastic quality, but not as high res as you'd think, with some of it looking kind of blurry up close, but reasonable from a distance. I'm not a huge fan of the realistic look in this series, as I am the more stylized art of the previous games, but this is a great model of Snake, that's for sure. The very next year, in 2015, we'd see Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, and this would feature Venom Snake, which I'll leave there for the sake of spoilers. Being that Phantom Pain and Ground Zeroes were made in conjunction with each other, they both feature the same realistic-looking human models of Snake. This one is 20,820 tries, so just a bit larger than Ground Zero's model. If I had to guess, I'd say the robot arm is the case for the spike in tries versus the previous model, but it's a really cool feature on this one. The texture quality is the same as the previous model too, kind of blurry and not as sharp as you might expect from this generation of games. It looks great in-game though, with the right lighting and in motion. And that takes us up to present day, where in 2024, Solid Snake and Old Snake respectively arrived in Fortnite of all places. Back in a stylized form, these models are very highly detailed in their presentation. Solid Snake is 4,482 tries, and Old Snake comes in at a whopping 44,127 tries, making this the largest model of Snake there is across the entire series. Despite the cartoony nature and art style of Fortnite, I wasn't expecting these models to be of such high quality, but the modeling is superb and the textures and materials are sharp as a tack. Every detail of the source material is accounted for, down to the tiniest point. The face of Solid Snake might not be to everybody's taste, but I think Old Snake is pretty spot on. Directly comparing them to their original game counterparts, we can really see what a great job was done with Fortnite's representation of the source material. Metal Gear Solid is one of those video game series that is standing the test of time in a big way. From 1998 all the way to 2024, it's remained relevant enough to be introduced into something as current as Fortnite, which will in turn introduce a lot of people to the series. And who knows what lies in store for Solid Snake, or any Snake for that matter. All I know is, the best is yet to come.